I'm very envious of Steve for many, many reasons. The most important reason is I wish I had his hair. Okay. I have a special surprise for you. We have David Wu, who's U.S. Congressman from Oregon, and he is the first and only Chinese American in the U.S. Congress. I think he's a phenomenal role modeling for all of us. So I would like to invite him to come up and give a very short remark. David?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm not going to tell you any of my story. I'm here to talk about your bright and shining future. But I'm going to do so by talking about the past. And the reason why I'm going to talk about the past is because we have a certain tendency to look upon history as following a certain path, that it was determined. And I hope to make the case to you that history is very uncertain, and it could have been very, very different. And if history could have been different, then the future is certainly malleable and will be shaped by you. And that's very, very important. I want to talk about the Japanese internment of World War II. Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7, 1941, and although the country was anguished and outraged, the reaction to Japanese Americans was initially very sober and measured. The Los Angeles Times editorialized that Japanese Americans are Americans and should be treated as such. The military commander for North American West, for the U.S. West, said, an American is an American, and it doesn't matter if he or she is of Japanese descent. What then followed was a series of Japanese victories in the Far East, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Guam, Wake. And as these events unfurled, the level of concern and even of panic on the West Coast and across the country began to take hold. The Rose Bowl of January 1942 was played in North Carolina instead of traditionally its site in Pasadena, California, supposedly out of range of Japanese bombers. The same John DeWitt who had said an American's an American reported that every ship leaving my part of the country, leaving the Columbia River, was attacked. And then when it was pointed out that there were no such attacks, he answered, well, that's because they're saving their blow. And then he said that a Jap is a Jap, and I don't care if he's an American citizen or not. And under that kind of environment, there began a push to remove Americans of Japanese ancestry from the American West Coast. And this was hotly debated within the American government because there were several attorneys, many attorneys within the Department of Justice, who strongly believed that this was unconstitutional. What they did not know was that as they went into what they thought was the final debate on this issue, that their boss, Francis Biddle, a gentle, soft-spoken man new to the Roosevelt cabinet, who's not sure of his standing with the president, had buckled to Henry Stimson, the Secretary of Defense, who was a giant of that era. They had already lost the argument, despite the fact that there was no evidence. The claims of attacks on ships leaving the Columbia River were false. The claims about radio transmission from mainland America, the FCC investigated them. They were all unfounded. The other claims of espionage investigated by the FBI and Herbert Hoover, unfounded. The assertion that tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition and hundreds of guns had been seized. Well, someone didn't mention that they had been seized by a Japanese American, at a Japanese American owned sporting goods store. And under those erroneous facts, Executive Order 9066 was issued, and Americans of Japanese descent began to be removed from the West Coast. Okay, I want to set that story aside just for a second and jump to a fellow named Fred Korematsu, who is...
Please. You and I have agreement.
If those of you who are interested in hearing the rest of the story, you can come to the C100 meeting in Washington, D.C.
Right.
next year.
Yes.
But let me finish. I'll skip the Korematsu story, and I will skip the internment story. But let me just close by saying one thing,
Sure.
and that is amongst you all. You will occupy positions of great responsibility someday, and you will be in a position to help each other out. Now, I suspect that all of us have been in a Chinese restaurant at one time or another in our lives. As you walk into some of these restaurants, you will see a tank, and in it will be a bunch of Dungeness crabs, hopefully from Oregon. Now, those crabs, if they cooperated, could all get out of the tank. You know, crabs pile up toward the center. I mean, they could pile up toward the edge. They could climb up, and if one crab would just push the other up, the crab would hook onto the top, you know, and help the next crab up and over the top. They could all be out of the tank. They could all be out of the tank. But they're not. Why? Because if you notice the behavior of crabs in a Chinese restaurant tank, as one crab climbs the pile, other crabs pull that crab back down. When I first ran for public office, I gave a quick call to Governor Gary Locke of Washington State. I didn't have to stay on the phone more than 3 minutes before Gary said, "David, I'll help you out." I was speechless, unlike today. Help each other out. Help each other out. Just remember the crabs. They could all be out of the tank if they just work together. Don't be like the crab that pulls the other crab back down. For the rest of the story, you gotta come next year.
I love the crab story. It's wonderful. Okay. So the dignitary has spoken. So let's have the mentoring session start. I was told that there's a recorder on each table, and if the mentor would like to have a conversation recorded, use it. If you don't have to. Okay? Let's go.